How much news can you tell? I've decided, before we analyze the news, I wrote myself, this is not actually me doing that, but I decided to write myself a letter that said something like, "Dear Sir, just what in the hell is this thing? What's going on here?" I think we've done variations of this before, but I decided to do it again because, as you know, we've been treating it like a news show, and it's not actually a news show, and we've been treating it like many of the people on stage never look at cameras, but those of you who are watching this at home on TV, I guess you're aware of the fact that this is filmed and shown on TV. Well, I know we have some people in the audience with those high, whatever you call it, things. But since that is being done, beyond my control, I just know it's done, I have started, since this is being shown more and more places, I have started carrying around my twin stepbrother, who's not actually related to me, but I carry him around because there are more and more people now who will stop me in places and say, "I've seen your show, isn't it you?" And I'll make him do all the answering, but he'll do things like, "Yeah, that could be." And then the most common question, of course, is, "I tried to watch you a little while, and just what is it?" And I have my twin stepbrother, who's not actually related to me. He's come up with several answers. The same way that us filming these, I've really got no control. The name of it, somebody else made up the name, and I just let him film it, tape it. I let my twin stepbrother, who's not actually related to me, I let him answer, and I've heard several. I usually try to turn my head. I don't even want to hear it. But I've heard him answer people, and I heard him tell one woman that it was psychology from hell. Which, since I put him in charge, fair is fair, I do not stop him. I don't try to criticize him, correct? But I've heard most people, he just tells them, now it's a talk show. Because if you tell somebody that, and they turned on and they obviously saw me stand here talking, and he says, "Well, it's a talk show." What are you going to say after that? There have been funnier and stranger notations made by the people to my twin stepbrother about it, but I won't go into them. I think that covers it. I was going to say very quickly, that we'll jump back over it. Should we even bother? As soon as man started to be able to think, as soon as the nervous system jumped above that gap that he was no longer just, that his highest end was not up into what is commonly referred to as the limbic region of the nervous system, he was no longer just a sensitive, herd-driven social creature with what seems to be some of the higher emotions, as zoologists and even biologists and psychologists want to refer to some animals, that they seem to have some concern over their young, and that they will in fact sometimes show something resembling care for one another, even outside the family unit, some form of charity. But man on this planet jumped a little past that, we'll just make it fast, made up history, and began to think. And as soon as man began to think, he was part of what made him unique. Besides then being able to think, he was already unique. So after you're unique for 30 minutes, big deal. It's like, what are you going to do for an encore? He looked around, in fact, there was nobody to applaud him. The wolves and the orangutans, and no one went, "Jesus, he can think." And so humanity, Adam and Eve, all of humanity, nobody ever got a hand. So you were unique. Let's say Adam and Eve, speaking figuratively. And for those of you watching this in Siam, and you Buddhists and Hindus, you know what I mean. If I pronounce the names of Adam and Eve and translate, many people here will go, "Well, now you're back speaking in a foreign language," which is one of the ones that somebody told my twin stepbrother, who's not kin to me. "Oh, he's the one that does that show in a foreign language." And he went, "Yeah, it's a talk show." And they went, "Yeah." You do understand this was somebody, I overheard him in English, said, "Oh, that's the show that he does that in a foreign language." And my twin brother went, "Yeah." What you going to say? Just thank God they didn't say what language. They didn't seem to want to pursue it any further. They just wanted validation that there was a reason that they couldn't understand what was going on. "Oh, it's a foreign language." Well, no wonder. as soon as man began to think, be reasonable, pick out your own figure, or I can do it for you and tell you the truth, it was less than a week. And for a while, it was a big deal. Well, imagine when you first learned to think, you've already forgotten about it. But as soon as you learned how to think, it was a big deal. Well, up until that time, it was before you got a tricycle or your first Barbie doll or something important. But learning how to think was a big deal because you could talk then. You could go, rutabagas again. Something important. Up until then, you just had to either eat them or spit them out. But once you could talk, then life changed dramatically. For how long? Being a human, as far as the nervous system, it has what is known in atomic physics as a low threshold of boredom. I think it's physics or mathematics. And so man was astounded. You were astounded. All little nippers are astounded. Adam and Eve was astounded for, I was going to let you guess, but I'm going to tell you it was less than a week. And they were astounded, but they looked around and there was no one to applaud. Because part of being able to think is to round up an audience. What do you think that man has a tongue for? Thank God he has ears, because at the very least, your tongue always has at least one audience. One audience. Even a hermit. You got your own ears. You can talk and go, God, am I sharp? Maybe I should go back in the city and give him another chance. At any rate, the way it operates in showbiz terms, as soon as you thought, humanity thought, in a short period of time they did not have an audience and no one encouraged them. The other creatures, no one said, well, boy, that's great. The other creatures didn't show any envy, which would be a form of audience participation. That could have run humanity for years. But chimpanzees, dogs, cats, everybody around them, nobody seemed to show the least bit of interest, assuming they had any awareness that anything was going on. They showed no interest, much less any envy. They didn't applaud them. They didn't criticize them. But as you should know, to keep the nervous system alive, especially within man, if there's one thing that cannot be tolerated, if there's one thing that is moot, vacuous, empty calories, is what approaches clinical, objective, sang-froid reaction from others. Nobody likes that, to say the least. So humanity waited. Adam and Eve waited. They waited for the trees. They waited for gods. They waited for their fellow creatures. They waited for somebody to go, boy, what's that you're doing? What is that? And they go, well, we call it talking. We call it thinking and then talking. And for them to go, or something like that. Did they? No. So then what did that take? Man had to continue, or he really began to drive. That's the way it seems to people. He began to have to drive himself. He had to begin to treat what was becoming the desired aims, that which was tomorrow calling. He had to treat it like, I am about to catch up. It is down near a fait accompli. We're not there yet, but Jesus, I can almost spell it. We can almost grab it. It is so fast, you are playing your own performer up here, and you're playing your own audience. It just so happens that in a three-dimensional world, everything is arranged in what appears to be, what smells to be, what tastes to be, what sounds to be, on binary basis. And so you have got, if you want to take it one way, the nervous system up to the good old limbic point, the gap, and then that's everybody's brain. Don't anybody take it offensive or be offended. This can talk, or I put it one way, a tongue. And you've always got an audience. Man spurs himself on. As soon as man started to talk, within a week, to be real specific, within a week, believe it or not, this kind of crap started. Can you believe that? And there are people out there in life now driving my twin stepbrother nuts. Better him than me. And it's not just me. Whenever this stuff shows up somewhere, there's always, well, let's use this. I shouldn't keep trying to shift the blame, but I don't care. Within a week, this kind of crap started. This very thing. With two people, because that's all it took. And I assure you, we'll do it the non-sexist or the more up-to-date way. We'll do it this way. within a week, Eve, which you can take that as being one of the lobes, a tongue, one of them began to play performer. Eve began to try and think just ahead of where they were. And almost immediately, he came up to her and started this stuff like, didn't I see you on TV? You got some kind of show. What the hell are you talking about? And she looked around and thought, boy, I wish I had a twin stepbrother or sister, somebody to take the load off of me. You know, because that's where the band was formed and came out of Canada to sing the song. Okay. If there was any decency in the world, even I would apologize for doing that. With all the news items we have done of late, this can't come as any sort of grand surprise or loan rent discount moment of epiphany with most people. But you do have to understand that the human mind at the ordinary level cannot come up to a completed state, or it is suicidal. In an individual here and there, it doesn't matter. Just as, you know, a sick cow out in a herd. The herd, you know, if we're talking about the race of mooses, the race of mooses will, you know, press right on if a moose here and there falls by the wayside. But humanity as a whole, if they could intellectually catch up to the point that they could turn to themselves and say, what, aren't you on TV? And you go, yeah, this is you. This is the human intellect. Don't I hear you talking about unusual things? Yes. I thought so. You know what? What? I understand it. Pow! And you think things are, you know, well off now that the USSR has broken up and there is no Cold War and we're going to dismantle some of the atomic weapons? That kind of blow up would make an atomic weapon look like somebody's leftover whoopee cushion from the World's Fair of 1939 with half the air already gone. It is simply suicidal. Man continues to struggle, and there's many of the news items that some of you can do on your own, that, and much in ordinary life. Except in ordinary life it has another tinge to it, it has another taste to it, but it's what it would appear to be with ordinary people: social criticism, sarcasm, cynicism, or irony. That is, that things are never exactly right, which ordinary people would say, well, you're true. That's correct. There's nothing weird about that. We all know things are not right. But then they go off down that wonderful path of nowhere, as they're supposed to. Because if they'd say, well, you're right. Now you begin to make sense. You're right. Things are not as they should be, comma, or dash. And then they're off. Then they're going to start talking about politics. They're going to start talking about religion. They're going to start talking about anything as to why things are not right. But see, that is not the point. Things do not seem to be right because the door cannot be closed. The circuit cannot be completed. Man's intellect cannot be absolutely, finally, Put it to you, those of you who like conspiracy ideas and the idea of mysticism and metaphysics, let's assume there is a secret. Of course, it's easy to say that there is a secret. The secret it would be, if there was one, if there is one, the secret would be, and take it in a non-clerical sense in any way, but the secret would be, what's life about? What's going on? If there was such a secret, it cannot be found, it would not be found, by going down one of the roads as to what's wrong. Because the secret would be the final nail in the coffin. The secret would be if humanity in large numbers suddenly went, aha, and they knew the secret, if there was one, that could be verbalized. If they knew the secret, that would be absolutely, literally, physically suicidal at the intellectual level. This kind of speculation is of no great interest, but I just wanted you to, in case anybody missed the point, it would be suicidal in the sense that humanity might still survive, but if this would happen, which it wouldn't, what it would do is render man back to the level that he did not have an operation past the higher point of the limbic system. We'd be back at some level, just take your choice, orangutans, baboons, we'd be non-speaking, period. You might look the same for a while, but man would not speak So he might survive, but that's not going to happen. But I want you to see the point. That is the only distinction. That is the discrete jump between anything observable on this planet and man. And man is driven by, we're not quite right. And it's not physical. That's only for the crude sorts. It's a hobby, but that's back to the old idea that ordinary people quite often will try and improve themselves physically. Today it's never been more popular. How's that for a safe statement? It's never been more popular, to work out, to jog, to cut down your cholesterol, to eat more fish, to eat less fish. It's to work on yourself physically, to quit smoking, to start smoking, quit drinking, start drinking, then start drinking for the first time so that you can quit and get somewhere in life. All of that, you must understand by now, it is not funny, it's not ironic, I'm not saying it sarcastically, with an ordinary person. If they want to do something with life, what's an ordinary person left with? What are you left with at the ordinary level? What's the first thing that comes to mind, which is sort of funny if you understand? What's the first thing that comes to mind when you think of self-improvement? The first thing most people think about in the Western world today, if you're not starving, is, I think I'll lose weight. People in other parts of the world, the first thing that comes to their mind is, boy, I wish I had something more to eat. But at any rate. It would appear to be physical improvement. I mean, that seems to be the obvious one. I did try to get you to consider last time we were talking. That is, in a sense, if you can see it from a non-partisan, non-critical view, in a sense, that is one of the world's great sense of misdirection. For all of you ledger domain lovers, you remember the one where the magician says, now, I want you to watch. Because, now look, I got my sleeve pulled up. And you see there's nothing? See, there's nothing here. But you got to understand, you're supposed to be looking up there. And misdirection is this. While he's getting out whatever the gaff is in his pocket, and he's going, Suddenly he reaches under his arm and pulls out a small accountant. Or maybe a rabbit. But it's through misdirection. That is sort of a form of a supreme, beautiful misdirection of trying to improve yourself physically, because what it amounts to is the knowledge which no other creature, understand this, that's obvious, no other creature you never see, they have never even gotten on their hands and knees. People with much experience in the National Geographic crap stuff that slip up, hang out in the bushes, and are real quiet for days and days until chimpanzees or orangutans don't know they're there, and they suddenly start to film them. They have never yet caught an orangutan checking his diet, counting calories. They've never caught a chimpanzee with little stones, trying to do his biceps up. They've never snuck up on a water hole down in the Serengeti plain and saw a hippo come up by the water when it was still and kind of glance down and suck in to see if he's lost. Well, in case I strung out too far last time, simply notice, if you don't know, if you have no knowledge of death, which you've got to have an intellect working to have that. But if you have no knowledge of death, you won't try to improve yourself. That's one way to look at it. And as long as you have animals, or as long as we have only man who does, and therefore every other creature on this planet does not know, they do not have intellectual knowledge that they're going to die because they don't have any intellectual knowledge, period. But as long as you don't know you're going to die, which is there was a news item tonight, that is the irony. If there is such a thing as irony, there's only one. And that is man's alive and knows he's going to be not alive. That's the only irony. After that comes all the baby, the sub, and the poetic ironies that men so love. Because it distracts from the fact, well, I may not die, not as long as I can write poetry about it. The attempt to improve yourself, which always ends up, or the obvious step is always physical, is, no matter how it's cut, is based upon the fact that you know you're going to die. And so what do? Well, I'll get myself in better shape. Which, as some of us like to think or say, that won't withstand a whole lot of thinking. If you're going to work out and then change your diet, don't think about it, because that's exactly what it is. You can't find, if a creature does not have a working intellect, it will not try, quote, to improve itself. And notice, if it did try to improve itself, why it was funny, it was an orangutan, checking calories, a chimpanzee trying to build up his biceps, or a hippo trying to suck in its gut and see if it's lost weight. What do humans do? Not to pick on them, but what is the first thing a person will incline to do if you speak about self-improvement? Just an ordinary person, an educated person. In the Western world today, if you say something about self-improvement, what's one of the first things they'll say? It could be a man who is a PhD on tenure in the philosophy, or the head of the philosophy department at some local university. And what's one of the first things, if you just fall into a casual conversation about self-improvement, one of the things he is inclined to say is, did you know I just joined the gym? Now, if you talk a while longer, and if you really bring up the subject, like, well, by the way, didn't I understand, don't you have a book? Didn't you write something on philosophy in the modern world? And so it may get into that. And he may say, well, yes, as a matter of fact, I am, in fact, trying to expand my horizons. I have gone back to school on the side, and I am now working on my PhD in sociology. So he might get into improving himself here, but the first thing that will come to anybody's mind, and they will almost leave it there, even someone who is, by all general purposes, an intellectual, they will almost be satisfied to leave it at the fact that you can say, oh, aren't you Dr. So-and-so? Yes, I am. Glad to meet you. And you talk for a little while, maybe a little bit about philosophy at the university, and you say something about, well, I'm working on a book, or my brother's working on a book about self-improvement, how important it is in today's world. And you know this intellectual, sophisticated man, if you start just at that level, self-improvement, what's going to be the first thing that'll come out of his mouth? He'll say something like, oh, you're talking about like aerobics or, diet? And he'll join into it. Whether he does or not, he will say, well, yes, I've been planning to take up jogging. Or I used to be more athletic back when I was in my college days, and etc. All attempts at that level of self-improvement is a form of irony, because what it is an uncodified, it's a misnamed, it's an unrecognized attempt not to die, which, if you can think, is a serious affront to your intelligence. Not from somebody else, don't blame it on them, for you to put up with it. For you to believe that you're going to improve yourself physically for some other reason than what it is. Not that there's anything wrong with feeling good, that's not the point. But for you to think, improving myself physically is a form of self-improvement, well, maybe if you're a hippo, maybe if the level of your intelligence as far as you're concerned does not surpass that of one of the higher primates, it is not self-improvement. But then it gets even more interesting if you find that interesting to start with. And that is, well, if you get into the intellectual area then, literally into the intellectual area, then we have gone past that cruder, less efficient level. Right? No. How so? Is having a PhD going to make you live longer? Is having a higher position in the faculty at the university? Is having more public awards, Nobel Prizes, Pulitzer Prizes? Is anything going to change? What man tries to do, as he's supposed to, is to think beyond what is necessary right now. And all this kind of crap, all this kind of stuff. And if we were going to use metaphors, I could pick out things throughout history. You've done it yourself, and you say, well, I bet so-and-so, and I look back historically, I bet if that actually happened, it was this kind of stuff. Probably. I mean, if we're going to pick out, I'm not even going to say what it is. Think about some of the stuff that can considered to be highly, in a not too weird way, but highly speculatively, in a philosophical, metaphysical sense, historically, and if you say, well, if those people or that person or that activity actually happened, I bet it was this kind of stuff. You're probably right, but so what? Aristotle out there hanging around the olive groves and looking funny at some of the young guys and them talking and other things we don't think about. It was too. Michelangelo laying on his back sweating. The Pope downstairs sweating. Everything that man's done, you could say, well, did I mess it up for you? Pick out something in history. Buddha. Let's take something let's try and pick something that was not too likely to be intellectually captious to you. But if you think, boy, I bet people like that, or maybe Buddha himself, he actually lived. That guy had to be involved with stuff like this. Maybe. But Jesus, so was Chaucer, Plato, Attila. I grant you some of them, if you had to dig them back up, some of them would probably make better neighbors than others. But every human that's been alive that could think, no matter how crudely, in some way was involved with this kind of stuff. But if they're not doing it in a very high manner, then those next to them, they don't come up to them in the post office like they do with my twin stepbrother and say, hey, I've seen your show and heard you talk. Exactly what is it? Nobody ever went up to Attila and said, well, I've seen some of the aftermath of your work. I'd like to ask, just what's that about? Everybody knows what it's about. Or people walk into a church or a synagogue or any kind of apparent religious institution throughout history, and they listen to somebody holler, it's a good thing you people are here, and you immediately, if indeed you belong there and you feel kind of guilty for being alive, you realize you're in the right place, and then they begin to talk about, I am a spokesman here for the guides, which they're talking about tomorrow. I'm a spokesman for what we should be doing. And you know what's coming after that, where they're speaking in Yiddish, Italian, Greek. What's coming after that is, you're not doing right. And you go, oh, I love it. I love it. Oh, because you do. It shows you're alive. If you don't love it, in that sense, if you don't love it, you're outside the mainstream of life. You are a weak calf running around. You're going to get called out. You're of no great consequence. You're not middle class. You're not properly bourgeoisie. You're supposed to feel bad. You're supposed to be able, whether it's done to you religiously, or if it's now down to the intellectual point that somebody, that you could go to a lecture. Let's say that you're an agnostic. It doesn't have to be religious nowadays. Or it never did, but today it certainly doesn't. And a man gets up and makes a lecture on how we should all try to improve ourselves. Not just physically. Anybody can do that. We're here. I know all you people. You're here from the college. All of you are part of the faculty or your family members. We have got to strive, even those of us who have been fortunate enough now that we have all of our graduate degrees, is to press on. You cannot stop and rest upon your laurels. You must press on intellectually and continue to grow. And if all you got to do is go, yes, yes. Get that neck straightened up like a bass player. You remember that one? We don't want to go into it, do we? That is guilt. And if you don't like that, it's correct agreement to exhortations to higher intellectual and continuing higher intellectual achievements. It's guilt. You're ashamed to be alive. There's nothing wrong with that. That is a sign that you're right in the middle of the great bell curve. Dr. Watson, right in the middle of the bell curve. But to think that there's some way to reach any degree of satisfaction, you got to understand by now, it's not normally available. And by now I think enough of you can see that if it were available to normal people, it would be suicidal. This is, life makes people suspected. Perhaps there are all sorts of stories. Perhaps one of them is that Ibsen story about the wild duck. The whole idea, and fairy tales are full of it throughout Western Europe and other parts of the world, but of people getting their dreams. The King Midas story, in case you guys just take it as being greed, you can look at that as another story. The man gets his wish, and what is it? It's bad news. Except that seemed like a rating from the Western world, because what's better? To being intelligent or being good looking? Being friggin' rich. And that was getting close. The man didn't have to go out and work for it. His wish was, no matter what he touched, he could touch rudabakers, not have to eat those bastards. He could touch them, and they turned to gold. And then what happened? Well, he went to the bathroom and unzipped his robe, and before he thought about it, is that the way it went? I know something bad happened. What was it? Something like that. And he went, oops. The point was, the stories, it's not just me saying this to you. History is also full, whether they understood or not, it's not the point. You don't have to get involved unless you want to again about, well, did people like Buddha really live? Did the Grimm's brothers, were they actually some kind of mystics undercover? It's life talking. At any rate, the stories around about people getting their wish, and what happened? It turned out to be unusually far from what they expected. How was that? Bad news. It turned out in many cases to be deadly. And you'll get ordinary people. They can read the play The Wild Duck, or they can read fairy tales in a certain way. And it seems like, well, that's true. Boy, if you want too much in life, they usually want to throw in modifiers. That's why we pick on them so much. If you want too much in life, if you get too greedy, if you want to be too smart, if you want to be too powerful, it'll bring about your own downfall if you do succeed. It is almost possible to get ordinary people to conceive of the fact, you have to sort of trick them or put it in just some sort of decent, ordinary language, to see that you could think better than you do. The day still hadn't arrived. Words are not that important, but I keep saying thinking to direct your attention higher up the nervous system as opposed to what seems to be the former common areas of cultural, artistic, religious achievements. But you could get people, if you put it in a certain way, you get people to agree that, yes, you could think better than you do. You could think in a way that would be more profitable. Now, I don't mean think now in some logical sense. You can get people nowadays that perchance seem to hold, on the surface, strong political views. Real conservative, real liberal, let's say. And you could get a person, if you talk to them a certain way, maybe get a drink in them, and you can get them past the point of you feeling as though you're partisan, that you are offering an intellectual threat or an attack on what they're doing. You can almost get people, take them a few minutes, talk to them, and almost get them to the point to realize or to admit that I might be better off intellectually were I not need to let them use modifiers or help them. If I were not quite so adamant in my political views in this particular direction. And you have to sort of encourage them, not that you're wrong, but you realize, I've seen you around, I can tell how intelligent you are, I've listened to you, I've read one of your books, or I've listened to you talk, but sometimes I notice you'll get in a conversation and your face begins to get red. And I say, well, that's true. I have certain hypertension, and my doctor has even mentioned that I should probably cut down on these kind of arguments or me showing up for public lectures and making these political commentaries. You're right, I get too worked up. They will not take it absolutely to the intellectual level and leave it there. They will have to say that it has something to do with passion, which everything does. An ordinary man would not be talking about politics, or he wouldn't be talking about anything in particular, unless he had some passion, which is simply to say that, all electricity comes out of the wall, which is to say that anything that runs your mind, it didn't start in your mind. There it is. It started down below. It started downstream. It started where the kid's up on the bank playing dueling banjos and looking like what he is, an incestuous waterhead. But that's where everybody's thinking comes from. It comes from the past. It comes from the original incestuous relationships of eating your own feet. It has to. But there is a passion behind it, but you can get ordinary men to the point that they, like I said, under the right conditions. I just want you to see that it's not that strange. And you can get them to see that, well, you're right, some of the things I talk about, perhaps I do take them too seriously. It could be religion, it could be politics, it could even be sports. But they still cannot see that it is to the level now, or it would be if they were trying to actually do anything about it, that it is intellectual, that is, it's verbal. They would be right on the cusp, if it mattered, of having some realization, or you could almost push them over to realize that what you think could be changed, and it actually has nothing to do with what you're thinking about. That me thinking this strenuously, this passionately, perhaps to my own detriment at times, on politics or religion or whatever, you can almost get them to see that's almost futile. Because it's, in another sense, if you can jump right quick, it is intellectually an attempt, even for a fanatic, just in the general sense, somebody with strong political views, let's say again, that is a form, an attempted form of self-improvement. And you can say, well, wait a minute, somebody that's just absolutely pig-headed about conservative views, that the whole world is absolutely going to hell and trying to change things, thinking we can change conditions, whatever attack they make on the liberal view of politics, or vice versa. They can say, well, that is very important, and perhaps I should not hold such strong views, or I should try and maybe ease off. Now I'm getting 50 years old and I'm 50 pounds overweight, and I get too upset about it. Maybe I should calm down. You cannot really get an ordinary person past the point of them realizing that, wait a minute, the message, you got nothing to do with this. It's the medium. That's what would kill me. That's what could be improved, because they would still want to approach it once you've gotten to that point on a partisan basis. They say, well, you're right. Maybe I should be more broad-minded. If you had time to fool with somebody like that, you could start thinking, well, all right. But it would take a lifetime to go from, well, being broad-minded to being non-partisan. That is, to being objective, because they don't want to be objective. It's not even natural. But if you described it to them, to an ordinary person, it would sound like that you were threatening to shoot their wild duck. It'd sound like you're about to erase their mind. And they think, well, what would I be? And they're right. Because without an ordinary man talking about what he is, he's not really much of anything. In a human sense. He is certainly a person. He can be alive. But how does ordinary people, how do you at the ordinary level, how do you know who you are? You have to keep reaffirming it. You have to keep really telling what kind of guy you are, what you think, what you believe, what you stand for. And if you don't, it's like you don't exist. You become unsure about it. They even in psychology consider that, carried to not much further an extreme that I could describe or that you're aware of, that it can be pathological. It's not good. I mean, you're somebody. Speak up. Tell people what you think. Have social discourse with your fellow man. And you should, if you're ordinary. I mean, ducks got to quack, fish got to swim. Attorneys have to talk to one another. Nobody else will talk to them. Rabbis and priests walk down the street and nod and think, well, what are you going to do? Ordinary people have to talk. And what do they have to talk about? Themselves. What else is there to talk about? This sort of thing talks about not man as he is, but you can't talk about man as what he's going to be. It's only ordinary people do that. And of course then they cheat. Because they don't talk about how you're going to be now. They talk about how you're going to be after you die. They insult me, Daddy ate to the bar. I guess we should leave on a positive note and try to do a public service and say that in general, I must say to anybody, if there are any generals or even retired people from the service watching this, that it is probably not a good idea to try and play with your own mind. That's darn well been established, I think. That's why they have, amongst other reasons, that's why they have certain prohibitions or at least restrictions on the consumption of certain drugs, alcohol, some of the stronger drugs, some of the more outlandish religions at any particular time, all sorts of, society must look after itself. So it is probably not a good idea to play around with your mind. The justice being that most people's mind is so small that it's not like if we were going to move it into a metaphysical analog or parable, allegory. It's not like with an ordinary person that's so large, it's not like that you play with yourself so much that you're going to blister your dick. Most people are not going to hurt themselves. I assume we're off the air so that we don't have to worry about Let me reread one. I didn't put the... There's nothing wrong with the way it was read, or I would have stopped it, but the emphasis, I really wanted to put one more place. It was part of our School of the Air segment of How Things Are 101. And tonight's lesson was, men will only take a serious man seriously. Not only is that true with ordinary people, until you learn how to do it, which I think as a figure of speech, because I know some of you can, but you will only, your mind, if you think that you're trying to tell yourself something good, or trying to translate something good from a book, or to read something in a book, and then to reflect on it, to ponder it, to ruminate. For all you cow philosophers. On it. It has to be a serious idea. But on top of that, the first part is, didn't mean to bypass it too fast. You do understand that's true. Men will not take anything other than a serious man seriously. They might think he's an entertainer. They might think that, well, comedian. But it's not serious. I mean, the Pope, I guess, can make a joke every now and then. A little minister can. A politician can make a joke as best politicians can. And everybody will laugh, but you know by now you can't overdo that. Plus, you're outside the realm of apparent democratic elections where you have people that are actual kings and dictators and tyrants as God intended, while having to put up those goddamn elections. They don't ever make jokes. That's the first thing they teach in king school or tyrant school. Don't laugh. Don't laugh and don't make others laugh. That's serious. That is serious business with them. Now back to you in your own kingdom. Well, back to literally, physically, externally. Men will not take other men seriously who are not serious. They will not take a non-serious man seriously. And of course, they won't take what he says seriously. But then to yourself. There was another one I was going to try to pull out right quick about whether a viewer thought he had something backwards about where that we are reporting byplays between hormones and neurons, and he said that sometime he thought maybe you got it backwards. And there was a punchline at the end that pointed out that one of the signs of a real thinker is you can have something apparently backwards, and it doesn't matter. And it was somewhere else, the rhyme of the Modern Mariner, which I took care of, that old wordy Wordsworth. I got down to 2 lines. Oh, I want to sail where sequence begins to fail. If you were trying to translate something that you had read or some thought you had to change your own thinking, there's no way to start off and try and analyze this or approach it in a different way. If it doesn't seem serious, you don't even think about it. Not if you're trying to think seriously. Not if you're trying to improve yourself. Seriousness only runs in one direction. Seriousness is always sequential. And the funny thing, which is obviously not serious, and is funny in too broad a sense, ordinary people won't even stand for it, if you tried to seriously tell somebody that there's a way that you could listen to somebody make an important speech, or something you thought you were interested in that spoke on philosophy or psychology or cosmology or mathematics, and they made a statement like, here's some of our latest findings, and you heard them, maybe you're just listening to one ear, how to drink, and you actually heard it backwards. If you know how to think, and it had any significance, as we do say in higher mathematics, it doesn't make a rat's ass. Not if you know how to think. And then somebody come along and say, wait a minute. Of course, I don't know why this would happen. You wouldn't be talking to somebody else, but somebody else could jump into your brain and go, wait a minute, I just heard what you thought. But I was sitting there with you. I heard that guy. You should pay attention. You took it exactly backwards. What he said, you have it diametrically in the wrong direction. But by then, if you know how to think, it's too late. If there's something that you're going to get out of it, it doesn't matter. Too late's only if you're going to die. Too late's only if you're running by chronology. Too late is only if you're running in one direction. Too late is only if you're serious. Because there's nothing more serious than being late. But consider, I'm sure that's easy enough to see. I wasn't trying to make a veiled hint about why this might not ever get taken real seriously, but you do see at the ordinary level, people as best they can, men will not take anyone seriously, anybody else, unless that person is serious. I mean, it's a quite plain distinction. You're either a comedian or you're a lecturer. You're either a priest or you're a clown. Now, of course, I know there are other things, but what I'm saying is you cannot be both. There's no such thing as a comedic, metaphysician. But all that should be plain enough. That's just the way life is. But consider, now you could say, well, that's true, and people could miss something. Shame on people. Well, you don't shame people yet. Look at the way that your own nervous system works, your own mind. Under ordinary conditions, if you read something and you consider it serious enough, like, well, let me write this down, or I want to think about that. It's not going to be some fucking joke you wrote down. It's going to be something what? Serious. And at first you think, well, what else would it be? I'm not going to write down some kind of nonsense. It shows that you're still on the what? The right path. You are straight as an arrow. I was talking about seriousness. There was another one, but the only manner by which ordinary minds can believe that they are hearing any meaningful comment on the nature of life. That is, the only way that ordinary minds will believe that they're hearing anything serious. And not just in the pejorative sense of me saying serious, but of men thinking, well, I am hearing a comment about life, about the nature of life, and I'm hearing something that could be meaningful, something I perhaps should remember or consider. It's always on this basis. It has to be, when we're talking specifically about human nature, man's position in life, it will always be on this basis if ordinary people are going to take it seriously, no matter their culture, religion, education. It's always on this basis. Once, man was so-and-so, but now he's become, or is becoming, very quickly, this and that. And you think, how true? They may have it wrong, you may be disagreeing. It could be a political statement from a liberal view and you might be a conservative, or it could be a statement from a Christian view and you could be Islamic, but it always has to be. So you could either agree or disagree. Of course, I know with ordinary people, they think, well, if he's wrong, I'll disagree, and it shows my superior intelligence. Right, I'm sorry, right. I always get that confused. I always want to call a plumber when I should be trying to lead those in the back row to stand up and say, hear, hear. It has to be on the basis that they're going to say in one way or the other that at one time man was such and such, but now he is this or that. Which there was another one I don't think we pulled out that also pointed out that ordinary minds, the way people ordinarily think, is always on the basis of eternity and or what just happened, which is the same thing. They're both impossible, that is meaningless, moot concepts to deal with. That's the same thing, that is, well, it's tied to the same basis I'm saying, that ordinary minds will only take a serious comment having to do with the nature of man if it in some way is tied to. It gets down to introductions. I noticed it didn't get much. It was pointed out in definition way down in the bottom of something that epilogues are introductions for sissies. That's people that the mind don't want to come out in front and say, well, here's what I'm going to do. It goes ahead and does its song and dance and see how it plays, and then it says, oh, P.S. And then it gives what should have been the introduction. I knew if I explained it, it would really make a lot of difference. Well, it's still true. Epilogues are introductions for sissies, for the faint-hearted, for the uncertain, and for those with bad memories, I guess. For the comment to be taken seriously about man, it has to say man was such and such at one time, and now he is such and such. And it's obvious to the crowd of your intelligence, I don't have to point out, that to say he's gone from being so-and-so to this and that is not a complimentary observation. It's always that things are slipping away. Things are sliding downhill. That is tied directly to the fact that the ordinary mind It is always talking about, in some way, just you listen to yourself, listen to conversation. At its widest extreme, at its most apparent, admirable extreme, it is always talking about infinity. Life after death, that's the extreme. Transcendental reality beyond any agreeable, reasonable sense of expectation. Never mind all that. It's either that or what just happened. You mean the present? No, just what happened. It has to already have happened. So we can go, wait a minute, things were such and such, and now look at them. Look what just happened. There is a difference between, I want to make sure this one, maybe I didn't write it clear enough. There's a difference between remembering what happened to you and remembering what you thought about it. Would you make a note for page 26 for me to, whoever's doing it? There's a difference between remembering what happened to you and remembering what you thought about it. This gets at, one way, I'm not going to go into it really, but at the heart of what appears to be psychology in its widest form. But ordinarily people do not remember what they thought about what went on. It's not even required. It's not required anymore. If you think it is, then you are still stuck at the level that I could say, well, what do you think is going to happen next? What are you going to say next? And you'd try to tell me. Well, you'd try to weasel out of it, of course. People remember what happened, but if you ask somebody, well, can you remember what you thought about what was happening when it happened? And if you ask them, they will say yes, because ordinary people cannot be stuck for an answer. You cannot be. You will no longer be ordinary. You'll no longer be sane. So you ask a person, so I understand that you were in that terrible financial fiasco that occurred. That multi-level selling thing that they were doing with used tennis shoes or something. Yes, I was. I was there. I lost everything I had. God, I bet that was horrible. I lost everything. Well, it all happened just at once. Just suddenly announced that they were closing down that. Yes, they did. What did you think when it happened? It was like my whole life. I don't know, just flash. I thought, well, how come bad things always happen to real good people like me? Somebody's already written that. Well, I thought something like that. Maybe I'd already read it. How did you feel when you looked up and you saw that woman leaning off the balcony and about to jump off? What was going through your mind? Well, first I'll ask, were you that? Yeah, I looked up and I was just coming into the hotel. I was, going to pick up some ice water there. I was going to meet somebody, and I looked up and there was this woman hanging off the ledge, and I thought, well, she's going to jump. Well, what went through your mind? I guess I thought she was going to jump. I mean, well, yeah, but how'd you feel personally? I thought, well, I wonder what sort of great, severe personal problems that the poor woman may have. We appreciate the interview. It is not required that a man remembers what he thought about what happened to him. What people say that they remember happened to him, as you should know, for those of you that watch Perry Mason on TV or watch yourself, remembering what happened to you is very problematic. As you know, people tend to remember things in ways that become debatable if there were other eyewitnesses. I didn't tell you that. I didn't do that. You just thought I did. No, you did. That's one thing. You don't even have to remember it good. You have to say you do. But to remember what you thought about it, it's not even in the game. Unless you ask somebody. Which is the kind of thing that subtly, indirectly, I keep trying to get you to consider on your own. It's not to catch people. But nobody remembers what they thought about what went on at the time. And yet you turn right to somebody on TV or to yourself and say, well, what went through your mind when you saw the people begin to jump off the top of the building? That person goes, and it's looked like that they're just reliving it in their mind. They go, I begin to think, my God. It's not that they're lying. It's just they open their mouths. It's live talking. It's the electrical, chemical energy that runs humanity. And they no more remember what went through their mind. They just barely remember what happened. They just barely remember what happened to them. Well, what happened, the police says? Well, I was staying out front waiting on a cab, and this guy came out of the bar behind me. They said, you've been looking at me all night, and he hit me. And the cop says, well, why do you think you did that? What went through your mind when you did it? Well, I guess I thought, well, the man must be drunk, or he mistook me for somebody else. Now, you have got to be ordinary in spades yourself to believe that somebody could ask you under ordinary conditions what went through your mind when so-and-so happened. But notice, here's the real good part, is you will answer. And if you're ordinary, you'll answer in such a way that nobody else, like the interviewer, there it is in front of the hotel, and the people just jumped off to their death, and the guy from Channel 7 runs up, and he says, did you see this? My God, I was here when it happened. You saw all four of them jump? All four of them. My God, sir, what went through your mind? I was thinking, that could have been my own daughters. That could have been somebody I've known. I mean, life is so short. Is anybody on Channel 7 going to say, I don't believe you thought that. I think you're lying. I mean, just look at the way you're acting. It's not possible. Think about it. It's not possible. And you can say, well, it is possible. That literally somebody, you do understand life is arranged in a certain way. Life is balanced. Life is healthy. Life is not suicidal. And you can say, literally, that could happen. Because you just said it. I just made it up. We can make a play. That's what fiction is. Things that can't happen. It's men trying to make it happen. Could that happen? Think about it. And you say, well, it could happen. It could happen in the same way that you could ask a man, well, what went through your mind when it happened? And a man turned to the reporter and say, I've got no idea. But not just that. I mean, you could ask me anything in my life. What went into my mind when I thought? I didn't know what happened. What happened this morning? What did you have for breakfast? Did your wife make you breakfast? And the reporter goes, none of this could happen. The reporter goes, well, yeah. What did she make you? I think it was French toast. When she brought it to the table, what went through your mind when you saw it? And the reporter goes, my God, you're right. I don't really know. And you say, well, that could happen. No, it can't. At the ordinary level, you ask yourself, well, when I think back the way my father mistreated me, the way my peers laughed at me because I was a chunky little bastard, and I think back how it hurt my mind. There's a difference between remembering what happened to you and remembering what you thought about it. The last part is that nobody does it. It's not required. But the funny, the interesting, the instructive part is everyone believes they can. They don't think about it, but all you got to do is ask somebody. And now people will admit, a sane person will of course say, I cannot remember what I thought about everything that happened to me in life. I can't remember what I was thinking every minute of yesterday. But if you pick out something of some significance, like the day my father died, the time I saw a horrendous car wreck, that sort of thing I can tell you. Because they won't do it beforehand, but if they heard this, and I said, all right, can you tell me what you were thinking when that happened to you? When you found out that your wife had run off with a man who worked at a Texaco station down the street. I was thinking that I'd probably never treat her as well as I should. Or, of course, he's from Mississippi. What went through your mind? Well, I thought, I never did like that bitch. According to where you're from. But nobody. You can't ask a person at the time or right after they do it. You realize that you just made that up. I mean, it sounds okay, and I'm going to let it go. Anybody else will let it go. But you understand that that probably is not what went through your mind. It could have, but it's probably not. You just said it when I asked you. And you say, well, if that be true, somebody would go, you're right. It's impossible. Because they didn't think anything at the time, things went through them. And for them to try and retrieve it, so you ask them, all right, can you tell me what you thought? And as soon as they look off like, well, yeah, let me think, they're lying already in the sense of knowing what they're doing because they didn't think anything to start with. And so to say, all right, I want you to think back when you saw those people jump off the building, all right? You know, I don't mean to upset you, but I just wish you would to prove the point. And all right. Now, if you'll think back, what actually went through your mind? They don't know what went through their mind at the time. They were not responsible. It's not for me to say it's a lie. I just did that for you to get a quick point. You understand it's not a point of them lying. It's the whole point of people believing. It's always back to this. Those of you that always liked it, plus all those of you who didn't like it, which showed that you like it. as smart as you are, smart as little whips, is to ask yourself, what am I going to say next? What am I going to think next? Then all you can do is start trying to run as fast as you can, like the little tigers around the tree in that fairy tale, and think, well, maybe if I go fast enough, I'll make myself dizzy and I won't have to think about it. Ha ha. So that's kind of a joke. I won't have to think about it. Man's ordinary mind was the definition. A cheap wind-up toy made in a foreign country. At local levels of thought, all local locales are a foreign country. In the sense, if you educate yourself, well, yes, I paid my way through school. No. Did you educate yourself? Well, as a matter of fact, I did better than that. I couldn't even afford to go to school. I spent hours at night in the library on my own, just picking out books on what I wanted. Yes, I instructed myself. Well, you're sort of man. The first time you found out, what was one of your favorite subjects? Psychology. Freud, particularly. Can you remember the first time you found a book on Freud? Yes, I can. As soon as you started reading, what went through your mind? Boy, I'll be glad to tell you. There is self-instruction. Yes, I'm responsible for what I know. The ordinary mind is a cheap wind-up toy made in a foreign country. Yes, but what if I now lived and heard this, and I lived in India, Bangladesh, worse yet, Australia? It's still true, because it was a foreign country. If self-instruction is not possible at the ordinary level, then why would you argue with the fact that your mind is a cheap wind-up toy that came from a foreign country? Where did it come from? You could call it something else. I still can't believe that no one likes... See, the whole news item, instead of it saying it was from a particular news desk or anything, it just starts off and it says, being different is no big thing if you seem to be different. And then after that it says, another fine news item from our how to go about it desk. So you see, it didn't say it was going to be a news item to start with. And then at the bottom it says definition, epilogues, introductions for sissies. Well, what better yet is you do your act and see if it's going to go, and if people show any interest, you go, oh, by the way, can I show you my act? That was me just doing that. See if they're going to read the book at all and like the first few pages. Go, oh, well, by the way, be sure and check the epilogue, which is the introduction, but they didn't have the nerve to do it. Which is one reason people love to be spokesmen for the gods. Because then you can jump right out with an introduction that's not your own. It's all plagiarism, as always. But if they want to hoot you, you go, hey, you know who you're hooting? You're hooting God. Which will bring many people, as they say, up short. That people go, well, maybe we should hold it down. Ordinary minds perceive of science and technological advances as perhaps the best way to dance near the edge of the ballroom floor. But as a matter of fact, for some, this is not necessarily the most efficient or rewarding approach possible.